It is very hard for archaeologists to explain how that was done using purely leverage and mechanical advantage. You can say, oh, perhaps they built a ramp and hauled the stones up the ramp.
We've always been told the pyramids were tombs built by ancient Egyptians using copper tools and sheer muscle. But what if that story is only half true, or maybe completely wrong? Graham Hancock believes we've misunderstood one of the greatest mysteries in human history. He claims to have uncovered the identity of the real pyramid builders, and he says he has the evidence to back it up. Get ready. This is not the Egypt your history teacher told you about. Who is Graham Hancock? If you've ever gone down a late-night YouTube rabbit hole or scrolled Netflix in search of something mysterious, chances are you've stumbled across Graham Hancock. He isn't your typical professor with a wall of degrees in archaeology. In fact, that's exactly what makes him both fascinating and controversial. Hancock is a British journalist, not an academic archaeologist. He first built his career covering politics and global affairs, writing for big outlets like The Economist and The Times. But in the 1990s, he made a dramatic pivot into a different world: ancient civilizations, forgotten histories, and the mysteries mainstream archaeology often refuses to touch. His breakout book, Fingerprints of the Gods, 1995, completely flipped the script on what we thought we knew about early human history. The big idea that an advanced civilization existed long before any known ancient culture, and when it was wiped out by a cataclysm, its survivors passed down their knowledge. According to Hancock, the pyramids are part of that legacy. Since then, Hancock has doubled, tripled, and even quadrupled down on his theory. Books like Magicians of the Gods, America Before, and his Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse have skyrocketed his popularity, while also fueling outrage among critics. Why? Because Hancock doesn't just suggest that archaeologists might have overlooked something. He flat out accuses them of deliberate ignorance. He argues that the academic world guards a rigid narrative, one that shuts out curiosity, alternative ideas, and especially evidence that doesn't fit neatly into the accepted timeline. Love him or hate him, Hancock has tapped into a powerful feeling that the official story doesn't quite make sense. He asks the kinds of questions people secretly wonder about but rarely say out loud, and his boldest question of all: who really built the pyramids? Let's dig into it. The traditional pyramid story and why Hancock rejects it. Here's the version you probably learned in school. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 BCE under Pharaoh Khufu, was constructed as a tomb. Over 20 years, tens of thousands of workers supposedly built the most precise and massive stone structure on Earth using copper chisels, sledges, ropes, and brute strength. Mainstream archaeologists say it was a breathtaking achievement, but still possible for a Bronze Age society. Hancock disagrees. In fact, he thinks this version of history isn't just unlikely, it's deeply flawed. To him, we've been spoon-fed a story that falls apart the moment you really look at it. And first on the list, the sheer, mind-bending scale of the pyramids themselves. The Great Pyramid is made of about 2.3 million limestone and granite blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons. Many of the granite blocks inside its chambers came from Aswan, over 500 miles away. The big question: how were they moved without wheels or iron tools? Egyptologists usually wave this off with vague mentions of sledges, boats, and hard labor. But to Hancock and to a lot of curious minds, that sounds more like magic than mechanics. Then comes the issue of time. If the pyramid was really finished in just 20 years, workers would have needed to set a block every 2 to 3 minutes, around the clock, without a single mistake, without delays, and without rest days. Imagine that. No weekends, no weather setbacks, no supply problems, just flawless, machine-like precision from a culture that hadn't even invented the wheel. For Hancock, that stretches belief. He's not denying the Egyptians were brilliant engineers. He's saying this version of events makes them sound superhuman. Another red flag for Hancock is the total absence of blueprints. For a project this massive, the largest building attempt in the ancient world, you'd expect at least some sketches, notes, or rough guidelines. But nothing exists. The Egyptians left receipts for grain, detailed tax records, thousands of religious texts, yet not a single construction plan for the pyramids. To Hancock, that feels less like a human project and more like a monument that appeared fully formed, as if inherited rather than built. Then there are the tools. According to mainstream theory, workers shaped granite using copper chisels. But granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth, while copper is soft. Even modern stonemasons armed with diamond-tipped tools struggle to cut granite with the kind of razor-sharp precision found inside the Great Pyramid. So how did ancient Egyptians, using what amounts to primitive tools, carve perfectly flat walls and smooth chambers that look like they were cut with lasers? No one has a convincing answer, yet Hancock keeps asking the uncomfortable questions. Another mystery, the pyramid's interior. Unlike almost every other Egyptian tomb, which is decorated with carvings, hieroglyphs, and religious art, even for minor officials, the Great Pyramid is completely bare. No paintings, no inscriptions, no record of who it belonged to, just cold, empty stone. For what's supposed to be the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu, the silence is deafening. If this was really his final resting place, where's the celebration of his reign? Hancock argues the emptiness doesn't match Egyptian culture or tradition at all. And then comes the alignment. The Great Pyramid is oriented almost perfectly to true north, off by only 3/60ths of a degree. It's more precise than many modern buildings. But how, without telescopes, lasers, or GPS, did ancient builders achieve that? Hancock sees this as evidence of advanced astronomical knowledge, possibly inherited from an earlier forgotten culture. Someone knew exactly what they were doing, and it wasn't a lucky guess. Put all this together, the scale, the logistics, the missing plans, the tool problem, the undecorated chambers, and the pinpoint alignment, and Hancock believes the standard story doesn't just have cracks, it collapses. He argues that Egyptologists don't actually explain how or why the pyramids were built, and worse, they overlook evidence pointing to something far older. So if the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids from scratch with copper chisels and brute force, then who did? Or maybe the real question is when? The case for a much older civilization. Here's where it gets really fascinating and controversial. Hancock suggests the pyramids might not be 4,500 years old at all. They could be far older, built not by the Old Kingdom Egyptians, but by a lost civilization that thrived long before official history begins. A people with advanced knowledge, high-level engineering, and maybe even global connections. Sounds wild, right? But Hancock isn't making this up. He's pulling clues from geology itself. Geology, astronomy, and archaeology's blind spots. Let's start with the geological argument, often ignored in debates about ancient history. Hancock leans heavily on the work of Dr. Robert Schuck, a Boston University geologist who shook the academic world in the 1990s with his study of the Great Sphinx. Schuck noticed deep vertical erosion on the Sphinx's body, the kind caused not by desert winds, but by heavy, sustained rainfall. Here's the problem. The Giza Plateau has been bone dry for the past 5,000 years. To get that kind of rain damage, you'd have to go back before 10,000 BCE, when the Sahara was green and fertile. That would make the Sphinx, and possibly the pyramids, thousands of years older than the textbooks claim. Hancock takes this even further. If the Sphinx is older, then the whole Giza complex might belong to a much earlier chapter of history. Maybe the Old Kingdom pharaohs didn't build the pyramids at all. Maybe they simply inherited them, added a few finishing touches, and claimed them as their own. After all, the Egyptians were famous for restoring and reinscribing older temples. Why not do the same with the pyramids? But geology is only one piece of the puzzle. Hancock also dives deep into astronomy, and this is where things start sounding like science fiction until you see how precise the numbers are. The 3 pyramids at Giza aren't randomly placed. Their layout mirrors the 3 stars of Orion's belt, a constellation central to Egyptian mythology. More intriguingly, the alignment works best not in 2500 BCE, the accepted date of construction, but around 10,500 BCE, when Orion's belt matched the pyramid's placement perfectly. This idea, called the Orion correlation theory, was first proposed by Robert Bovell and expanded by Hancock. If true, it suggests the pyramids were built, or at least designed, to reflect the stars at a time long before Egyptian civilization supposedly existed. Critics say this is cherry-picking, that you can make anything line up with stars if you try hard enough. But Hancock argues the precision is too exact to be coincidence, and it's not just Giza. Across the globe, from Stonehenge to Angkor Wat, ancient monuments show striking astronomical alignments. To Hancock, these weren't just structures. They were cosmic maps, recording a deep knowledge of the skies. And if early cultures had that level of astronomical awareness, maybe we've seriously underestimated their abilities. Then comes the site that changed everything, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Discovered in the 1990s and dated to around 9,600 BCE, it's the oldest known megalithic site in the world, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older than anything we thought humans could build. What's shocking isn't just its age, but its sophistication. Massive carved stone pillars, symbolic carvings, and possible star alignments, all created by people we still call hunter-gatherers. No farming, no cities, no writing, yet they built monumental architecture. For Hancock, this was the smoking gun. Göbekli Tepe proved that complex culture and intelligence existed deep in prehistory, long before the official timeline of civilization. If it happened once, why not elsewhere? This leads to one of Hancock's boldest claims, that around 12,800 years ago, Earth was struck by disaster, possibly fragments of a comet, triggering the Younger Dryas, a sudden period of climate chaos. Floods, temperature swings, and devastation would have wiped out advanced cultures, leaving only scattered survivors. If true, it would explain why history seems to begin so suddenly around 3000 BCE, because much of what came before was erased. Only fragments of knowledge survived, only the strongest monuments endured, and the pyramids, they might be among those survivors. It's a compelling story. Not because it involves aliens, Hancock dismisses those theories, but because it forces us to rethink what ancient really means. Maybe human civilization hasn't been one straight line of progress. Maybe it's been a cycle, rising, collapsing, and rising again. To many scholars, Hancock's theories are too speculative, but to a growing number of open-minded researchers and curious readers, they're not only possible, they're plausible. After all, if Göbekli Tepe existed long before farming, why not other lost cities? Why not other unknown builders? And if that's true, then maybe the pyramids aren't just tombs, temples, or tourist sites. Maybe they're messages from a forgotten world, built to last, and waiting for us to finally understand them. Technology they shouldn't have had. This is where things move from curious to almost unbelievable. If you even consider for a moment that the pyramids, or parts of them, might be older than we've been told, the next obvious question is, how were they built? Because even if you set the age debate aside, the sheer engineering behind these structures feels out of place in the ancient world. For Hancock, and those who share his skepticism, the real mystery isn't just who built them, but how. Start with the stonework. Step inside the Great Pyramid's chambers, or look at other ancient megalithic sites around the world, and you'll see something that looks almost modern. Perfectly straight cuts, joints so tight you can't slip a razor blade between them, and granite surfaces polished like they were machined. In the king's chamber, massive granite blocks are stacked with such precision that it feels impossible they were carved with nothing more than copper chisels and pounding stones. Modern stonemasons have tried to replicate this with copper tools, and the results aren't promising. Carving granite this way is painfully slow, and producing the glassy, flat surfaces we see in the pyramids is virtually impossible. Then consider the size of some blocks. At Baalbek in Lebanon, single stones weigh over 1,000 tons. The largest, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, is still sitting in its quarry, and even modern cranes couldn't lift it. So how did ancient builders move them? Hancock argues we're either badly underestimating ancient abilities or we're missing a forgotten technology. Hancock's smoking guns. The proof he brings to the table. For someone often called a pseudo-scientist, Hancock is surprisingly fixated on evidence. He doesn't just spin wild tales of lost civilizations and forgotten technology. He brings data. It may not count as proof in the peer-reviewed academic sense, but it's enough to stir debate, spark doubt, and ignite curiosity worldwide. Critics call him a master storyteller. Supporters say he's finally asking the right questions. Either way, his list of anomalies, his so-called smoking guns, deserves attention. First up, modern tech. With satellite imagery, LiDAR scanning, and seismographic surveys, Hancock highlights what traditional archaeology often overlooks. Instead of focusing only on ruins visible above ground, these tools allow us to peer beneath the surface, revealing structures and patterns that rewrite what we thought we knew. Using advanced tools like ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR, technology that can cut through vegetation and reveal hidden structures, researchers have uncovered what look like massive, unexplored ruins all over the globe. In Egypt, for example, scans beneath the sands of the Giza Plateau show hints of underground chambers and mysterious anomalies that haven't yet been fully excavated or explained. Hancock believes these buried structures could be far older than the pyramids we see today, possibly predating the pharaohs altogether. But the real shocker comes from the evidence underwater. Off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, divers stumbled upon what looks like a gigantic stone complex, a kind of submerged pyramid complete with steps, terraces, and carved platforms. Mainstream scientists still argue over whether it's man-made or simply natural rock formations. But Hancock, who has personally dived there, is certain it's artificial. If he's right, that would date Yonaguni to at least 10,000 years ago, back when sea levels were lower and the site was dry land. And Yonaguni isn't the only case. There's also the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a stretch of massive flat stones underwater that some believe to be an ancient roadway or breakwater. Mainstream archaeology shrugs it off as coincidence, but Hancock sees these as the remains of coastal cities swallowed by rising seas after the last ice age, cities that history says shouldn't have existed. Then we have the mysterious old maps that show far too much detail. The most famous is the Piri race map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who claimed he used ancient source maps. The strange part? It seems to depict Antarctica's coastline, without ice. Geological studies tell us the last time that coastline was ice-free was 6,000 to 12,000 years ago. How could a 16th century cartographer know that unless he was copying from much older maps? Hancock argues this, along with others like the Orontius Phineas and Boache maps, points to a forgotten global knowledge of the Earth's geography, possibly preserved from a prehistoric civilization that had already explored much of the planet long before European empires. There's also the cultural angle. We love a clean story. Civilization begins in Mesopotamia, flows into Egypt and Greece, then Rome, then us. It's tidy, it's linear, and it makes us feel secure. But if Hancock is right, that neat story collapses. Human history becomes older, stranger, and far more mysterious. Suddenly, we might just be the second or third civilization to rise. That's not only historical, it's psychological. So yes, academia keeps saying no. But the public? Millions are saying, wait, what if? Because when someone tells you not to look behind the curtain, curiosity only grows. The pyramids are more than ancient stone. They're puzzles, challenges, and messages that refuse to be silenced. Whether you agree with Hancock or not, his work forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew. The pyramids call to us across thousands of years. Look deeper, think bigger, stay curious. They remind us that history isn't finished. It's still being written. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest mysteries of our past hold the keys to our future, if we're willing to listen. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of the ancient world.